The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as recruits lined up for another grueling day. Among them stood someone who would change everything, though nobody knew it yet. She was average height, maybe 5'6", with short brown hair tucked neatly under her cap. Nothing about her appearance screamed Special Forces material. In fact, most of the male recruits barely gave her a second glance. Sarah Chen had arrived 3 weeks ago with minimal fanfare. Her paperwork was standard, her background check clean but unremarkable. She listed her previous experience as basic military service with some specialized training, but the details were vague. The instructors had seen hundreds of hopefuls come through these doors, and frankly, they didn't expect much from her. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 5 years training under Carlos Mendez, a man whose name was whispered in certain circles with a mixture of fear and respect. Mendez was a ghost, a sniper so skilled that enemy forces had put $1 million bounty on his head during 3 different conflicts. He had vanished from active duty 15 years ago, and most people assumed he was either dead or living quietly somewhere remote. The truth was far more interesting. Mendez had been running a private training facility in the mountains of Montana, taking on only 1 student at a time. He was selective to the point of being impossible to reach. Sarah had found him through a series of connections that started with her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who had served alongside Mendez decades earlier. During their first meeting, Mendez had been skeptical. He looked at this young woman who claimed she wanted to be the best sniper in the world and almost laughed. But something in her eyes stopped him. There was a determination there, a coldness that reminded him of himself at that age. He decided to give her one test. He handed her a rifle she had never seen before and pointed to a target 800 yards away. The wind was gusting, the light was fading, and the target was barely visible to the naked eye. Most trained snipers would struggle with this shot under these conditions. Sarah took the rifle, spent 30 seconds studying the wind patterns by watching the grass and trees, adjusted her scope, and fired once. The bullet hit dead center. Mendez stared at the target through his binoculars for a long moment, then looked back at Sarah. She was calmly checking the rifle's action, completely unfazed by what she had just accomplished. That was the moment he knew he had found something special. For the next 5 years, Sarah disappeared from the world. Her family thought she was working overseas. Her few friends assumed she had joined some classified military program. In reality, she was learning from a master who pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. Mendez taught her things that weren't in any manual. How to read wind patterns by the way shadows moved across distant objects. How to calculate trajectory adjustments in her head, while her heart rate was elevated from stress or physical exertion. How to remain motionless for hours while maintaining perfect focus. How to make shots that other snipers would consider impossible. But more than the technical skills, he taught her patience and discipline. He taught her to think like her target, to predict movements before they happened. He taught her that the difference between a good sniper and a legendary one wasn't just accuracy. It was the ability to make the impossible shot when everything was on the line. Now she was here, in this training facility, surrounded by people who had no idea what they were looking at. The instructors saw another female recruit who might wash out in the first few weeks. Her fellow trainees saw someone they didn't need to worry about during the competition for limited spots in the SEAL program. Sarah preferred it this way. She had learned from Mendez that being underestimated was often the greatest advantage you could have. While others focused on appearing impressive, she focused on actually being impressive. While they talked about their achievements, she quietly demonstrated capabilities that defied explanation. The training facility buzzed with the usual morning activity. Recruits grabbed equipment, checked their gear, and psyched themselves up for another day of tests designed to break them down. The instructors prepared scenarios that would push these hopefuls to their limits and beyond. Nobody noticed that Sarah Chen was different. Nobody suspected that standing among them was someone who had been trained by a legend, someone who possessed skills that would soon leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about what was possible. The stage was set for a revelation that would change how the military viewed not just female recruits, but the very definition of elite marksmanship. Sarah checked her equipment one final time, her movements precise and economical. She was ready to show them exactly who she was, even though she knew they wouldn't believe it at first. After all, legends aren't born from people you expect to be legendary. They emerge from the shadows when you least expect them, proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody is watching. The first real test came during week 4 of training. The exercise was designed to separate the serious candidates from those who were just going through the motions. Each recruit would face a series of marksmanship challenges that increased in difficulty, testing not just their shooting ability, but their performance under pressure. The course started simple enough. Standard targets at 300 yards, then 500, then 700. Most recruits could handle these distances with decent accuracy. The instructors watched through binoculars, making notes on clipboards, occasionally nodding when someone performed well. Sarah moved through the first few stages without drawing attention. Her shots were accurate, but not showboat perfect. She missed just enough to seem normal, competent but not exceptional. The other recruits barely noticed her scores. The instructors marked her down as solid but unremarkable. Everything changed at the final stage. The target was positioned at 1,200 yards, nearly 3/4 of a mile away. At that distance, the target looked like a tiny speck even through a high-powered scope. The wind was shifting constantly, gusting from different directions as it bounced off the surrounding hills. The temperature was dropping as clouds moved overhead, affecting air density and bullet trajectory. Most military snipers would consider this an extremely difficult shot under perfect conditions. With the changing wind and light, it bordered on impossible for anyone except the most elite marksman. The first recruit to attempt it was Jackson, a former Marine who had been dominating most of the physical challenges. He was confident, even cocky about his chances. He spent 5 minutes studying the target, checking his scope, adjusting for wind. His first shot missed by 2 feet. His second shot missed by even more as he overcompensated. By his third shot, frustration had set in, and he missed the target entirely. One by one, the other recruits took their turns. A few managed to hit the target area, but none came close to the center ring. The instructors weren't surprised. This wasn't really a test anyone was expected to pass. It was designed to show the recruits just how much they still had to learn. When Sarah's turn came, she walked to the firing line without ceremony. The other recruits were talking among themselves, some making jokes about the impossible distance. A few watched her with mild curiosity, wondering if the quiet woman would embarrass herself or surprise them. She picked up the rifle and spent exactly 30 seconds examining it. Not the 5 or 10 minutes the others had taken, just 30 seconds to familiarize herself with the weapon's feel and balance. Then she looked downrange at the target through her scope. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward by everyone who witnessed it. Sarah didn't spend long minutes calculating and adjusting. She didn't take multiple practice shots to walk her rounds onto target. Instead, she made a series of quick adjustments to her scope, settled into her shooting position, and controlled her breathing. The wind was gusting from the left, then shifting to come from the right. Sarah watched the grass and small bushes scattered across the range, reading the wind patterns like a language only she understood. She could see the way the air currents moved at different distances, how they would affect her bullet's path at various points during its long flight to the target. She chambered around and settled behind the scope. Through the lens, the target wavered slightly in the heat shimmer and wind. She waited, not for the perfect moment, but for the moment when all the variables aligned in a pattern she could predict. The shot came as a surprise to everyone watching. No long preparation, no dramatic pause. Sarah simply squeezed the trigger with the same casual precision someone might use to turn a doorknob. The sound of the rifle shot echoed across the range and faded into silence. Everyone waited for the range officer to call out the result through his spotting scope. The wait seemed endless, though it was probably only 10 seconds. When the call came, it sent a shock through the entire group. Dead center. Perfect bullseye. The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson stopped mid-conversation, his mouth hanging open. Other recruits lowered their binoculars and stared at Sarah, who was already standing up and checking the rifle's safety as if nothing unusual had happened. Instructor Martinez, a 20-year veteran who had seen everything the military had to offer, walked over to double-check with his own spotting scope. He looked once, then looked again, then called over the other instructors. They huddled around the scope, taking turns confirming what seemed impossible. The bullet had not just hit the target, it had hit the exact center of the bullseye at a distance where most expert marksmen would be happy just to hit somewhere on the target. Under conditions that made accuracy extremely difficult for anyone, Holy shit, whispered one of the recruits, forgetting they were in front of instructors. Nobody bothered to correct his language. Martinez walked back towards Sarah, his expression unreadable. She was standing at ease, waiting for whatever came next, showing no sign of excitement or pride about what she had just accomplished. Chen, Martinez said slowly, where exactly did you train before coming here? Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. Various places, sir. I had some good instructors. It was the kind of non-answer that made Martinez even more curious, but something in her tone suggested this was all the information he was going to get, at least for now. The other recruits gathered around, suddenly very interested in the woman they had barely noticed for the past month. Questions flew from every direction. How did she learn to shoot like that? Where had she trained? Was she some kind of competition shooter? Sarah answered politely but vaguely, giving them nothing concrete to work with. She had learned from Mendez that maintaining mystery was often more valuable than satisfying curiosity. As they walked back to the barracks, Jackson fell into step beside her. He was no longer the cocky frontrunner, but he wasn't hostile either. If anything, he seemed genuinely curious and maybe a little intimidated. That was incredible, he said. I've never seen anything like it, Sarah nodded politely. Thank you. Seriously, though, who taught you to shoot like that? That wasn't just good training. That was something else entirely. Sarah considered her answer carefully. She couldn't tell them about Mendez, both because she had promised to keep his location secret and because they wouldn't believe her anyway. How do you explain that you spent 5 years training with a ghost? I had a good teacher, she said finally. Someone who pushed me to be better than I thought possible. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the whole truth. That night, word of Sarah's impossible shot spread through the entire training facility. Instructors who hadn't been on the range that day came by to verify the story. The target with the perfect center hit was photographed and passed around like a trophy. Sarah Chen was no longer invisible. Everyone wanted to know who she was and where she had come from. But she remained as mysterious as ever, politely deflecting questions while continuing to demonstrate abilities that defied explanation. The real test was just beginning. Now that she had revealed a glimpse of her true capabilities, everyone would be watching to see what else she could do. Sarah was ready for that challenge. After all, Carlos Mendez had taught her that being underestimated was an advantage, but being respected could be even more powerful. The question now wasn't whether she belonged with the elite. The question was whether the elite were ready for her. Word of Sarah's incredible shot had reached the highest levels of command within 48 hours. Colonel Rebecca Stone, the facility's commanding officer, had seen the photographs and reviewed the witness statements. She had also made some phone calls to people who specialized in finding information that wasn't supposed to exist. What she discovered made her very interested in having a private conversation with Sarah Chen. The meeting took place in Colonel Stone's office on a gray Tuesday morning. Sarah entered and stood at attention, waiting for permission to sit. Stone studied her for a long moment, looking for something in her posture or expression that might give away her secrets. At ease, Chen. Have a seat. Stone gestured to the chair across from her desk. I've been making some inquiries about your background. Sarah settled into the chair, her expression neutral. Yes, ma'am. Your official records are remarkably thin for someone with your apparent capabilities. Basic training, some standard certifications, a few years of routine assignments. Nothing that explains what I witnessed on the range yesterday. I've worked hard to improve my skills, ma'am. Stone leaned back in her chair. Chen, I've been in the military for 25 years. I've worked with snipers who've made kills at distances most people couldn't hit with a laser pointer. What you did yesterday wasn't just impressive marksmanship. It was something else entirely. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several photographs. These are the only pictures we have of Carlos Mendez, taken before he disappeared 15 years ago. Ring any bells? Sarah's expression didn't change, but Stone caught a tiny flicker in her eyes. It was enough, I thought so. Stone set the photos aside. Mendez was the best sniper I ever worked with. Possibly the best who ever lived. When he vanished, a lot of people assumed he was dead. Some of us hoped he was just smart enough to disappear before his luck ran out. I'm not sure what this has to do with me, ma'am. Stone smiled. Everything, I suspect. Chen, I'm not going to ask you to confirm or deny anything about where you trained or who taught you, but I am going to tell you something that might interest you. She pulled out another file, this one much thicker. 3 days ago, we received a priority request from JSOC. They need someone for a mission that requires skills beyond what our normal training produces. The target is a high-value asset in a location that makes conventional extraction impossible. Sarah listened without commenting, but Stone could see she had her full attention now. The shot they need made is at nearly 2,000 yards, through a window that's only open for a few seconds at a specific time each day. The wind conditions are constantly changing due to the urban environment. There's no margin for error, no second chances. Stone paused, watching Sarah's reaction. They've already tried twice with their best people. Both missions failed because the shot couldn't be made under those conditions. What makes you think I could succeed where others have failed? Because yesterday I watched you make an impossible shot look routine. Because your background suggests you've had training that officially doesn't exist. And because if Carlos Mendez really did teach you, then you might be the only person alive who could pull this off. Sarah considered this for a long moment. She thought about her 5 years in the Montana mountains, about the lessons Mendez had drilled into her about when to reveal your true capabilities and when to keep them hidden. If I were to accept this mission, she said carefully, what would be the timeline? Immediate. The window of opportunity closes in 72 hours. You'd be inserted tomorrow night, and if I succeed, you'd be fast-tracked through the rest of SEAL training and assigned to a unit that specializes in missions requiring your particular skill set. Your career would be whatever you want it to be. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training facility where her fellow recruits were going through their daily exercises. None of them knew that their quiet teammate was being offered a chance to skip months of training and jump directly into the kind of mission that defined legends. I need to know one thing, Sarah said without turning around. Is this mission essential for national security, or is it just another target elimination? Stone was impressed by the question. It showed that Sarah understood the weight of what she was being asked to do. Without going into details I can't share, I can tell you that this target has information that could prevent a terrorist attack on American soil. Multiple civilian lives are at stake. Sarah turned back to face the colonel. Then I accept. Just like that. No questions about backup, extraction plans, or mission parameters? I assume you'll brief me on those details. As for the rest, if the mission is critical and I'm the best option to complete it, then the decision is simple. Stone nodded slowly. This young woman continued to surprise her. Most operators, even experienced ones, would want to know every detail before committing. Sarah's confidence was either the result of exceptional training or dangerous overconfidence. Given what she had seen on the range, Stone was betting on exceptional training. Your transport leaves at 0600 tomorrow. Report to Building 7 for your mission briefing at 1800 today. Everything you need will be provided, but if you have any special equipment preferences, now is the time to mention them. I'll need specific ammunition specifications and weather data for the target location. Also, if possible, I'd like to test fire the rifle I'll be using under similar conditions to what I'll face in the field. Stone made notes. Done. Anything else? Sarah hesitated, then decided to ask the question that had been bothering her. Ma'am, how many people know about this conversation? Very few. The mission details are compartmentalized. Why? Because if this mission succeeds, there will be questions about how a recruit who hasn't finished basic SEAL training was able to accomplish what experienced operators couldn't. I'd prefer to keep my background as quiet as possible. Stone understood. Chen, if you pull this off, you'll have earned the right to write your own story about where your skills came from. Until then, your secrets are safe with me. Sarah saluted and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Colonel, may I ask how you knew to connect me with Mendez? Because 15 years ago, Carlos Mendez saved my life with a shot that nobody believed was possible. When I saw what you did yesterday, I recognized the signature. There's only one person who could have taught you to shoot like that. After Sarah left, Stone sat alone in her office, reviewing the mission files and wondering if she was making the right decision. Sending an unproven recruit on a mission this critical was against every protocol in the book. But sometimes the book didn't account for the kind of talent that emerged from the shadows when you least expected it. If Sarah Chen really had been trained by Carlos Mendez, then she might be the military's best-kept secret. In less than 24 hours, they would find out just how well that secret had been kept, and whether the student had truly mastered what the teacher had tried to pass on. The mission would either make Sarah Chen a legend, or prove that some secrets should stay hidden. Either way, there was no turning back now. The mission briefing took place in a windowless room deep inside Building 7. Sarah entered to find 3 people waiting for her. Colonel Stone, a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself only as Thompson, and Lieutenant Commander Davis, who would be her mission handler. The target location appeared on a large monitor mounted on the wall. It was a compound in a city that Sarah recognized but couldn't officially identify. Urban environment, multi-story buildings packed close together. Narrow streets that created unpredictable wind patterns. "The target is on the 4th floor of this building," Thompson said, pointing with a laser pointer. "He appears at this window for approximately 8 seconds every day at 13:47 local time. That's when he makes a secure phone call that requires him to be near this specific window for signal reasons." Sarah studied the imagery carefully. "What's the distance from the optimal firing position?" 1,943 yards. Nearly 1.1 miles, she nodded, making mental calculations. "Wind conditions?" "Highly variable. The urban environment creates eddies and cross-currents that change constantly. We have meteorological data, but it's only useful for general planning." Lieutenant Commander Davis took over the briefing. "You'll be inserted here." He pointed to a rooftop about 8 blocks from the target. "The building is abandoned, giving you cover and concealment. Extraction will be from the same location 30 minutes after the shot. What about overwatch and backup?" "You'll have a spotter, but this is primarily a single-shooter mission. The spotter's job is to watch for threats and assist with target identification, not to help with the shot itself." Sarah continued studying the images and tactical information. The mission was exactly as challenging as Colonel Stone had described. The distance was at the very edge of what most people would consider possible, and the urban environment added variables that couldn't be fully predicted or controlled. But Mendez had prepared her for exactly this type of scenario. He had taught her that the most difficult shots weren't about perfect conditions, they were about adapting to imperfect ones. "I'll need to see the rifle and ammunition tonight," she said. "Also, detailed building plans for the firing position so I can identify the best shooting location." "Already arranged." The weapon is a custom .338 Lapua Magnum with modifications specifically for extended range work. The ammunition is match grade with ballistic coefficients optimized for this distance. Thompson leaned forward. "Jen, I need to be clear about something. This target has information about a planned attack on a major American city. 300,000 people could die if we don't stop it. But the window of opportunity closes tomorrow. If you miss or if something goes wrong, there's no second chance." "Understood." The pressure would break most people. "Are you confident you can handle it?" Sarah looked directly at him. "Sir, pressure doesn't change the fundamentals of marksmanship. Wind is wind, distance is distance, and the target is the target. The stakes don't affect bullet trajectory." It was exactly the kind of answer Mendez would have given, though none of them knew that. Davis handed her a communication device. "This will keep you in contact with the command center. We'll have real-time updates on target movement and any changes to the tactical situation." "What about the spotter?" "Do I know this person?" "Sergeant Rodriguez. 15 years experience, multiple deployments. She's solid, and she knows to follow your lead on anything related to the shot itself." The briefing continued for another hour, covering extraction procedures, backup plans, and contingencies. Sarah absorbed every detail while part of her mind was already working through the shot sequence she would need to execute. When the briefing ended, she was escorted to a private range where the mission rifle was waiting. It was a beautiful weapon, clearly built by someone who understood the requirements for extreme range precision work. The scope was a high-end variable power model with crystal-clear optics and precise tracking adjustments. Sarah spent 2 hours familiarizing herself with the rifle, firing groups at various distances to understand its characteristics. The weapon was accurate and consistent, exactly what she needed for tomorrow's mission. Later that evening, she called Colonel Stone from a secure phone. "Chen, is there a problem?" "No, ma'am. I wanted to ask a favor." "What do you need?" "If something happens to me tomorrow, could you make sure Carlos Mendez knows that I tried to honor what he taught me?" There was a long pause. "Chen, are you having second thoughts?" "No, ma'am. I'm confident about the mission. But Mendez spent 5 years teaching me that every shot matters and every mission could be your last. He always said a good sniper prepares for success but acknowledges the possibility of failure. How would I contact him if needed?" Sarah gave her a phone number with a Montana area code. "Tell him Sarah Chen says thank you for everything. I'll keep that information, but I don't expect to need it. Get some rest, Chen. Tomorrow you're going to make history." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. 5 years ago, she had been a regular soldier with above-average shooting skills and big dreams. Mendez had taken those raw abilities and forged them into something extraordinary. She thought about the countless hours of training in all weather conditions, the impossible shots he had made her attempt until they became routine, the mental discipline he had instilled in her. Every lesson had been building toward moments like this, when everything would depend on her ability to make one perfect shot under extreme pressure. Her fellow recruits were asleep around her, unaware that one of their own was about to undertake a mission that would normally be assigned to the most elite operators in the military. Tomorrow, while they went through standard training exercises, she would be attempting something that could change the course of national security. Sarah closed her eyes and visualized the shot sequence she would execute in less than 18 hours. She saw herself settling into position, reading the wind, making the final scope adjustments, controlling her breathing, and sending one perfect bullet across nearly 2 miles of urban airspace to find its target. In her mind, she could hear Mendez's voice offering the advice he had given her before every difficult shot during their training. Trust your preparation, trust your equipment, and trust yourself. Everything else is just noise. Tomorrow, the noise would include the weight of knowing that hundreds of thousands of lives might depend on her accuracy. But Sarah Chen had been trained by the best sniper who ever lived, and she was ready to prove that the student had learned her lessons well. The mission that would reveal who she really was to the military community was less than 12 hours away. After tomorrow, no one would ever again mistake her for just another recruit. The insertion went flawlessly. Under cover of darkness, Sarah and Sergeant Rodriguez were dropped on the roof of the abandoned building that would serve as their firing position. The urban landscape stretched out before them, a maze of concrete and steel that created the complex, wind patterns they would need to navigate for the shot. Rodriguez was a compact woman in her mid-30s with the kind of calm competence that came from years of high-stress operations. She had been briefed on Sarah's unusual background, though not the specifics of her training with Mendez. "I've got to admit," Rodriguez said as they set up their equipment, "when they told me I'd be spotting for a recruit who hadn't finished basic training, I thought someone had lost their mind." Sarah was assembling her rifle with practiced efficiency. "What changed your mind?" "The fact that Colonel Stone personally vouched for you, and the mission planners were willing to bet everything on your ability to make this shot. They don't take risks like that unless they know something the rest of us don't." The firing position was on the northeast corner of the roof, giving them a clear line of sight to the target building. Sarah had studied the building plans and chosen this spot because it offered the best combination of concealment and shooting stability. She set up her rifle on a bipod, then spent several minutes studying the route her bullet would travel. Between her position and the target were dozens of buildings, streets, and open spaces that would affect wind flow. Reading these patterns accurately would be crucial to hitting the target. Rodriguez established her observation post with a high-powered spotting scope and communication equipment. Her job was to watch for threats, confirm target identification, and provide real-time updates on conditions. "Command, this is Overwatch. We're in position and beginning final preparations." The voice that came back through their earpieces was calm and professional. "Copy, Overwatch. Target building is under surveillance. No changes to the timeline. Shot window opens in 4 hours and 12 minutes. Sarah used the waiting time to study wind patterns and make preliminary calculations. The morning air was relatively still, but she knew that would change as the sun warmed the urban surfaces and created thermal currents. At 1100 hours, she began her final equipment checks. The rifle was zeroed perfectly, the scope adjustments were confirmed, and her ammunition was inspected round by round. Everything was exactly as it needed to be. "Tell me something," Rodriguez said during a quiet moment. "Where did you really learn to shoot? And don't give me the standard line about good instructors. I've worked with the best snipers in the military, and they're all talking about what you did on the range. That wasn't normal training." Sarah considered her answer. She had grown to respect Rodriguez over the past few hours, and the woman deserved honesty, even if it couldn't be complete honesty. "I spent 5 years training with someone who was better than anyone currently in the military. she said finally. Someone who taught me that exceptional marksmanship isn't about having perfect conditions. It's about making perfect shots regardless of conditions. Special operations background? Something like that. Rodriguez nodded, accepting that she wasn't going to get more details. Well, whoever he was, he trained you for missions like this. I can see it in how you work. You're not nervous, you're not overthinking anything, and you're treating this like just another day at the office. At 1300 hours, Sarah began her final shot preparation. The wind had picked up as expected, and she could see the complex patterns created by the urban environment. Air currents were bouncing off buildings, creating eddies and crossflows that changed direction every few seconds. But Mendez had taught her to read these patterns, to see the underlying order in what looked like chaos. She watched flags, observed how dust moved in the streets, and studied the way heat shimmer behaved between buildings. Command. This is Overwatch. Beginning final approach to shot window. Copy Overwatch. Target is in the building. Estimate he'll appear at the window in 37 minutes. Sarah settled into her shooting position and began the mental process Mendez had drilled into her. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and entered the focused state where nothing existed except her, the rifle, and the target. Through her scope, the target window looked impossibly small. At nearly 2 miles away, even with maximum magnification, she was looking at a space roughly the size of a dinner plate. The margin for error was essentially zero. Rodriguez called out wind readings from her position. Wind at the halfway point is 5 to 7 knots from the southwest, gusting to 10. Near target area showing 8 to 12 knots, variable direction. Sarah made mental calculations, factoring in bullet drop, wind drift, and the rotation of the earth over the distance her bullet would travel. At this range, even the Coriolis effect became a factor that had to be considered. Command, this is Overwatch. Target window opens in 60 seconds. Copy, target is moving toward the window now. Sarah made her final scope adjustments and settled behind the rifle. Everything Mendez had taught her came together in this moment. 5 years of training, thousands of practice shots, countless hours studying ballistics and environmental factors. Target visible, Rodriguez called softly. Male, dark suit standing at the window. Confirm target identification. Through her scope, Sarah could see a figure at the window nearly 2 miles away. At this distance, it was more of a silhouette than a person. But the intelligence briefings had been detailed enough for positive identification. Target confirmed, she replied. The wind was shifting again, and Sarah waited for the pattern she had been observing to repeat itself. Mendez had taught her that wind wasn't random. It followed patterns that could be predicted if you knew how to read them. There. The flags and dust indicated a brief lull in the crosswind, with a steady but manageable headwind. Sarah had perhaps 3 seconds while these conditions held. She took a breath, let half of it out, and settled her crosshairs on the target. At this distance, she was aiming at a point in space where the target would be when the bullet arrived, not where he was standing now. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled against her shoulder. Sarah immediately worked the bolt and prepared for a follow-up shot, though she knew there wouldn't be time for one if she had missed. The bullet's flight time to target was nearly 3 seconds. In the scope, Sarah watched the figure at the window continue his phone conversation, unaware that his fate was already decided by a piece of metal traveling toward him at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Hit, Rodriguez called out. Target is down. Clean shot. The confirmation came through their earpieces a moment later. Command confirms target elimination. Overwatch, prepare for immediate extraction. Sarah began breaking down her equipment with the same methodical precision she had used to set it up. The mission was complete, but she felt no elation or celebration. Mendez had taught her that taking a life, even when necessary, was never something to celebrate. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez looked at her with something approaching awe. Chen, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. That shot was beyond textbook perfect. It was impossible made to look routine. Sarah finished packing her rifle. It was just training and preparation. Nothing more than that. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't entirely true. What she had just accomplished was the result of being taught by someone who existed beyond the normal boundaries of military training. Carlos Mendez had passed on skills that officially didn't exist, and Sarah had just proven that those skills were very real. The extraction went as smoothly as the insertion. Within 40 minutes of taking the shot, Sarah was back at the base, debriefing with Colonel Stone and the mission commanders. The room was filled with people who specialized in impossible missions, but they all looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and curiosity that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just a recruit with unusual abilities. She was someone who had just accomplished something that would become part of military legend. But for Sarah, the mission had served a different purpose. She had honored the training Mendez had given her, and she had proven to herself that she truly was worthy of the skills he had passed on. The question now was what came next, and whether the military was ready to fully understand what they had discovered in the quiet recruit, who had just changed everything they thought they knew about what was possible. The debriefing room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. Sarah sat at a conference table surrounded by some of the highest-ranking officials in military special operations. Word of her impossible shot had traveled up the chain of command faster than anyone had expected. General Patricia Hayes, a woman whose reputation for discovering and developing exceptional talent was legendary, had flown in specifically for this meeting. She studied Sarah with the kind of intense focus reserved for people who might change the game entirely. "Chen," General Hayes said, breaking the silence. "I've read the mission reports 3 times. I've spoken with the spotters, reviewed the ballistic analysis, and examined photographic evidence of the shot placement. What you accomplished yesterday shouldn't be possible." Sarah remained at attention. "I was fortunate that conditions aligned for a successful shot, ma'am." "Fortunate?" Hayes leaned back in her chair. "Chen, you made a shot at nearly 2 miles through variable urban winds with a margin of error measured in inches. The ballistics team calculated that the probability of success for that shot was less than 15%, even for our most experienced snipers." She opened a folder and pulled out several documents, which brings us to the question everyone in this room wants answered. Where did you acquire capabilities that exceed anything we've seen from our own training programs? Colonel Stone shifted in her seat. They had agreed beforehand that Sarah's connection to Carlos Mendez would remain classified unless she chose to reveal it herself. Sarah had spent the night thinking about this moment. She could continue to deflect and maintain the mystery, or she could trust these people with the truth. The mission's success had proven her abilities beyond any doubt. Now it was time to decide how much of her story she was willing to share. "General, I was trained by Carlos Mendez." The reaction was immediate and electric. General Hayes sat forward sharply. Colonel Stone's eyes widened despite her prior knowledge, and several other officers began talking at once. "Impossible," said one voice. "Mendez has been missing for 15 years. "We assumed he was dead," said another. General Hayes raised her hand for silence. "Chen, Carlos Mendez is a legend in our community. If he's alive and if he really trained you, then we need to know everything." Sarah took a breath and began telling them about her 5 years in the Montana mountains. She described Mendez's remote training facility, the impossible standards he had set, and the techniques he had taught her that went beyond anything in official military manuals. She told them about learning to read wind patterns by watching shadows, about making trajectory calculations while under extreme physical stress, about developing the mental discipline to remain focused for hours at a time. Most importantly, she told them about learning to make shots that other people considered impossible. "He chose me because he saw something he thought was worth developing," Sarah explained. "But he made it clear that the training would be unlike anything the military offered. It was about pushing past normal human limitations." General Hayes was taking notes rapidly. "Is Mendez still training people?" "I was his last student. He said he was too old to continue, and that he had passed on everything he could." "Would he be willing to consult with our training programs? Share his techniques with our instructors?" Sarah shook her head. "He was very clear that his methods only work with certain people, and that trying to teach them broadly would be ineffective. He said the military's approach of training many people to a good standard was correct for most purposes, but that occasionally you need someone who can exceed those standards." Colonel Stone leaned forward. "Chen, what you're describing suggests that Mendez was developing capabilities beyond what we thought was humanly possible. Are there others out there with similar training?" "Not that I know of. He was very selective about his students, and he trained them one at a time. I believe I was the only person he worked with in the past 10 years. General Hayes closed her notebook and looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a unique asset with capabilities that exceed our current understanding of marksmanship limitations. The question is how we proceed. She turned back to Sarah. Chen, you've proven yourself beyond any doubt. Normally, someone with your abilities would be assigned to our most elite units immediately, but your background creates some complications. What kind of complications, ma'am? The techniques you've learned aren't part of any official training program. We can't replicate them. We can't teach them to others, and we don't fully understand them. That makes you potentially the most valuable sniper in the military, but also the most difficult to integrate into standard units. Thompson, who had been quiet throughout the debriefing, finally spoke up. There's also the question of what happens if word gets out about Mendez being alive and training people. That information could create security issues. General Hayes nodded, which is why this entire conversation is classified at the highest levels. Chen, what I'm about to offer you is unprecedented. She paused, making sure she had Sarah's full attention. We're creating a new unit specifically designed around your capabilities. You'll be assigned to missions that require skills beyond what conventional snipers can provide. Your training will be completed on an accelerated schedule, and you'll have access to equipment and support that reflects your unique value. What's the catch, ma'am? Hayes smiled grimly. The catch is that you'll be taking on missions that others can't complete. Yesterday's target was actually a test case. We have situations developing around the world that require exactly the kind of impossible shots you've proven you can make. Sarah considered this carefully. It was everything she had worked toward, but it also meant accepting a level of responsibility that few people ever faced. General, before I accept, I need to ask one question. Will I have the freedom to turn down missions that don't meet my ethical standards? What do you mean? Mendez taught me that the ability to take life from extreme distance comes with responsibility for how that ability is used. I won't take assignments that are purely political or that target people who aren't legitimate threats. Hayes exchanged glances with the other officers. This kind of moral stance from an operator was unusual, but it also suggested the kind of character they wanted in someone with Sarah's capabilities. Chen, I can guarantee that you'll only be assigned to missions involving legitimate threats to national security. The targets will be people like yesterday's subject, individuals whose continued existence poses immediate danger to civilian populations. Sarah stood up and came to attention. In that case, ma'am, I accept the assignment. The meeting concluded with discussions of logistics, security protocols, and operational procedures. Sarah would finish her SEAL training in a compressed time frame, then be assigned to a unit that didn't officially exist. As the room emptied, Colonel Stone approached her. Chen, you've just changed everything. The missions you'll be taking on will make yesterday look routine. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because you're about to become the military's best-kept secret. The person who gets called when impossible is the only option. Sarah thought about Carlos Mendez, hidden away in his Montana mountains, and the legacy he had passed on to her. He had spent 15 years in obscurity, emerging only to train one person who could carry forward his extraordinary skills. Now she was about to disappear into a different kind of obscurity, becoming the ghost who made impossible shots when everything else had failed. It wasn't the career path she had originally envisioned, but it was exactly what Mendez had prepared her for. Colonel, she said quietly, when you talk to Mendez, tell him his student understands what it means to be exceptional. And tell him I won't waste what he gave me. 3 months later, Sarah Chen's name appeared on no official rosters, but stories about impossible shots made by an unknown sniper began circulating in certain intelligence circles. The legend of the ghost who could make any shot was born, though no one knew her name or how she had acquired skills that shouldn't exist. Carlos Mendez, monitoring news reports from his remote mountain facility, would occasionally see references to missions that had succeeded against impossible odds. He would smile quietly and return to his solitary life, knowing that his legacy was in good hands. The military had finally discovered what it meant to have someone who could do the impossible, though they would never fully understand how or why it worked. Some secrets were meant to remain hidden, passed down not through manuals or official training programs, but through the rare connection between a master and a student worthy of extraordinary knowledge. Sarah Chen had become exactly what she was meant to be. A legend hiding in plain sight, the answer to questions that most people didn't even know existed.